4 guys left on the debate stage last night. We got, we're not afraid to mention all of them. You know, we should probably do turnabout as fair play and say only Ron Paul was on the stage last night. There were no other candidates. But no, we'll actually mention there was a guy named Romney. There was a guy named Gingrich. The swinging Gingrich, we call him now. In fact, a little later with Liam, we may have some calls on that because there's some new supporters for Gingrich since he's come out as someone who wants multiple wives simultaneously. We'll get to that. And then there was a guy named
2 Mormons on the stage again now?
What? How many Mormons?
Is there 2 Mormons?
No,
on
there
the
was only
stage
one.
Again?
But Gingrich is starting up his own kind of thing, and we'll get to that.
Sorry, that was an unfair dig on Mormonism.
No, and then there's Rick Santorum, who is showing some proclivity for flip-flopping on issues, particularly related to abortion. So it's interesting how they opened this thing, and there were a lot of it was a rowdy crowd, and this time they didn't boo Jesus, as far as we know. They didn't boo Jesus or the Golden Rule last night. That was good news for creation, let's say. Right. But beyond that, they opened this thing, and the first 11 minutes of airtime, Romney to Gingrich to Santorum to Gingrich to Romney to Gingrich to Santorum to Gingrich to Romney. It's like, where is Ron? Hello.
For 11 minutes, it went between 3 guys.
Yes.
And finally, after 11 minutes, they finally get to Ron Paul on the question of, will you be able to repeal Obamacare? And it was quite funny when they finally got to Ron Paul, what his reaction was.
Let's give a listen to this.
Do you trust these men to repeal Obamacare?
Thank you. I thought maybe you were prejudiced against doctors and a doctor that practiced medicine in the military or something.
I love that. It was great.
That was so funny. He's just like,
hello.
Finally.
Here I am. And, of course, to bring up some of the things, because they have tried so desperately to make him the wild-eyed loon. And, you hear in talk radio, they all still call him crazy or whatever they do. And, he comes across as a guy that is the most sane up there, as they're all, the 3 candidates, going after each other over, who's married to who. I don't know. It was kind of crazy. And, of course, they're going to give props to Gingrich for attacking John King because he asked the question about his swinging wild ways.
There's so many people that are saying that Gingrich won the debate in the first few minutes because he did that.
Yeah.
We probably shouldn't get into the Gingrich wife thing. We can get into that later if we want, because I did watch Nightline last night. It was rather interesting. But anyway, yeah. Gingrich likes to attack the media, and, what a better way to deflect from the truth of a situation than to go after the messenger. It's a great tactic. But.
To Gingrich's credit, he knows the art of war. He knows to take it to the enemy in that way. And, of course, the bloodlust in the Republican so-called pseudo-conservative, neoconservative crowd loves that idea, as we covered on yesterday's show about the neoconservative Bill Kristol and how they take their marching orders from this kind of concept, the new century of America. And so he plays it out even within the media, but it's all a ruse because the media is involved in this as well. They're corrupt, and that's why, other than the Robert Scott Bell Show and maybe a few others, nobody's mentioning Ron Paul today at all. It's like, oh, who's that other guy on this? Oh, yeah, he's there, but never mind. Let's move along. Nothing to see here.
The other guy, the unnamed, yes.
Yeah, well, he is mentionable here. In fact, it goes on in getting into government in involvement in medicine. And I've talked to Congressman and Dr. Ron Paul over the years on this show about that long before he was, an item on the stage and getting the kind of attention he's getting. And I'm glad he is. But I think it's important to hear what his perspective is on this.
Yeah, basically this was after he said, thank you for acknowledging me on the topic of repealing Obamacare. He just goes on further here to explain government involvement in medicine. And at the end here, he actually takes kind of a nice little stab at Santorum.
I'm more concerned about a bigger picture of what's happening, and that is government involvement in medicine. I had the privilege of practicing medicine in the early 60s before we had any government. And it worked rather well, and there was nobody out in the street suffering with no medical care. But Medicare and Medicaid came in, and it just expanded. But even when we had the chance to cut back on it, when we had a Republican Congress and a Republican president, we gave him prescription drug programs. Senator Santorum supported it. That's expanding the government.
And, of course, Santorum would say, well, I was supporting the people in my state who are largely liberal. And there's another point in there later in the debate where he goes into, and Ron Paul nails him, too, are you going to support the people of Pennsylvania or South Carolina when you're president, right?
And rather interesting.
If that was
Santorum didn't even respond to that.
No, I don't think he could say anything. I mean, that was a beautiful little dig, and that's what tells me Ron was on his game yesterday. I mean, you could always nitpick. Oh, he didn't say. It's my goodness. And this issue is so very important to me, of course, in the Robert Scott Bell Show audience, because we're all about health freedom here. And to have the government out of medicine means that all the healers suddenly are freed up to heal. We can solve the so-called healthcare crisis, but all of the other Republicans on stage, and quite honestly, most of them in Congress and the Senate, do not get that. When they talk about freedom in medicine, they're still arguing for freedom within the medical monopoly, which, newsflash, that's not freedom. You cannot have freedom in a medical monopoly or any monopoly at all. So anyway, that was great. Ron was really on fire and targeting it and taking it to him yesterday. Very impressive.
Absolutely. So we got past Obamacare, and then we got on to one of the hot button issues of the debates, the candidates releasing their tax records. Now, they've been going after Romney on this because they're trying to paint Romney as a 1%er, which I'm not really going to argue with that. But the big thing is, when are you going to release your tax records? You're going to I'm releasing my tax records. In fact, Gingrich released his tax records like 1 hour before the debate started last night.
Yes.
No strategy there whatsoever.
Well, this is like the man going like, who's, what is bigger, right? Oh, you released one. I'm going to release 12 years of tax records.
Yeah, it's kind of silly. So anyway, the question comes up. This was a question from the audience, and he asked all of the candidates, when are you going to release your tax information? And this is what Ron Paul's response was.
Well, I hadn't thought it through. I don't have an intention of doing it, but for a different reason. I'd probably be embarrassed to put my financial statement up against their income, and I don't want to be embarrassed because I don't have a greater income. Now, it may come to that, but right now I have no intention of doing that. I think with our financial statement, congressional financial statements, I think you know more about me than I know about myself. That's how my wife found out so much about what we were doing, from my financial statement. Now, I don't think people need that because nobody's challenging me because I have no conflict of interest, and I don't even talk to lobbyists, and I don't take that kind of money. So there's no conflict.
Oops. Oh, my goodness. Wow. He let that slip. He doesn't talk to lobbyists.
Great answer. What a way to take an answer that is really kind of almost a gotcha question and turn it around and use it to your advantage. It was brilliant.
Oh, I loved it. In fact, it really related the difference between him and everybody else on that stage again. I've got nothing to hide. You know what I'm being paid as a congressman. The only thing I would have wished he would have added was simply that, hey, I happen to bring 100,000 plus back into the Congress. Basically, I'm not spending all the money that I'm even given. I'm not taking the congressional pension, on and on and on. And then the average person goes, oh, my gosh, this guy he's so different. This is real.
Right, he is. People love the answer. I don't want to release my tax information not because I have something to hide, but because I'd be kind of embarrassed compared to the rest of these guys as far as their income goes. It's a good point.
Well, real good point. And I said, you're making from Congress. This is what you're making. What's the big deal? And of course, the issue of no conflicts of interest. I don't take money from lobbyists. So what's the point? And people respect that. But you see all the funny games that are played, and then Romney, of course, they're trying to tag him because he's got his money in the Cayman Islands. Which, by the way, I don't blame somebody for wanting to keep more of their money. I wish they would stand up. Like Romney, if he said this, I would respect him more. You're darn straight. I don't believe the government should have this money. It is mine. I earned it. Let's keep it in the free market and help other people to get work. But he won't do that. And he's going to say, well, a 35% tax rate, you got to, get rid of the income tax is what we're talking about. Back down to zero. Allow freedom to reign supreme in a land that was once loving liberty. And, of course, there was no income tax prior to 1913. Ron Paul has brought that up as well. They don't get it. They're all about, well, government owns us. They won't say it that way. They'll pretend only the Democrats believe that. But quite honestly, Santorum, Gingrich, and Romney believe by their very actions and statements that the government owns you. And you get to keep what the government gets to say you can keep. That is not conservative. It is not any form of libertarianism either. Of course, Santorum doesn't believe there are libertarians in the dawning of the founding of this country. That's why we interviewed Tom Mullen last week on that issue as well.
Right. Yeah, Santorum doesn't like libertarians very much.
No, not at all. Not
at all.
Well, listen, let's see if we can fit in another clip here before we end this segment and continue on with our...
I'll tell you what, this next clip, I think, was one of the better parts of the debate last night. Now, we get to listen to the topic that I really like so much, and actually... one of Santorum's favorite subjects, and this is the topic of abortion. And so we get a question. I can't remember if it was from the audience or if it was from Twitter or something like that, where somebody was asking about the right to life. And so they started with Santorum, and then they went to Romney, and then they went to Gingrich. And then when it was Ron Paul's turn...
No more time. We're out of time.
Yeah, John King says, I'll let you in on the next question. And the crowd didn't want to have anything to do with that because the crowd had a reaction. They actually had something to say.
This is my favorite part of last night's debate where the crowd turned for Ron Paul.
Let's take another question. Congressman, I'll bring you in this one. Let's take a question now from social media. Question. Before we move on, you want in on this issue? They want you in on this issue. Would you like in on this issue?
But John, once again, it's a medical subject, and I'm a doctor,
Oh man, was that amazing? This was the moment that I think it's going to live on because it showed that the people, despite the fact that the old media is pretending he doesn't exist, the people know he exists. And no coverage in the national media, but you can bet there was coverage on the local level in South Carolina that unless you're in South Carolina, you're never going to see. So the illusion is Ron Paul doesn't exist, but they know he exists in South Carolina. They're going to know he exists in other areas of this country because the old media is losing its grip, and they were freaking on this one because John King couldn't ignore it.
It was awesome to see. We're so used to them just skipping over him. And, when these debates are going on, I'm following the live blogging of the reaction of Ron Paul supporters while this is going on. And every time that they do this where they skip him or don't give him a chance to respond, it really ticks people off because it's so obvious to the people that are looking for it. They're almost expecting it because it's a regular thing. This time when they tried to do it, the crowd caught him on it.
Don, remember?
It was an awesome thing to see.
Remember I talked about the law of reversed effort the other day? This is evidence of the law of reversed effort. The more the media tries to ignore him, the more he becomes center stage for the typical average, if there is such a thing, an American that would just say, hey, I just want to hear these guys and then make up my own mind. That's what we're doing here. That's why this debate coverage is happening on the Robert Scott Bell Show. Some political healing. We've got some more on this debate coverage before we go to Dr. King and talk female health. Ladies, ready? And, of course, Tom Woods coming up a little later in the program, and we've got lots of healing to go on the Robert Scott Bell Show. Stay with us.
Robert Scott Bell Show.
Remember, all the links are up and posted at robertscottbell.com. If you don't already, get your email updates through naturalnewsradio.com. Enter your email address there. 866-939-BELL, 866-939-2355 to let your voice be heard. Now, back to the debate footage from last night, the things that the old media will not mention, will not play. Yes, Ron Paul was up on the stage, and he was a star, an absolute rock star there. And we continue on into the most controversial subject. We talk about the issue of abortion. When does life begin? That kind of thing. The demagoguing of the issue continued last night, but Ron Paul did very well here.
I can remember the very early years studying obstetrics, and I was told, and it was before the age of abortion, and I was told, taking care of a woman that's pregnant, you have two patients. And I think that solves a lot of the problem about, when life begins and all. But I also experienced a time later on in my training in the 1960s when the culture was changing. The Vietnam War was going on, the drugs were there, and pornography came in, and abortion became prevalent even though it was illegal. So the morality of the country changed, but then the law followed up. When the morality changed, it will reflect on the laws. The law is very important. We should have these laws, but law will not correct the basic problem, and that's the morality of the people that we must do.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? When we talk about people that are really offended by, let's say, Christian conservatives, they say, you want to legislate morality. Ron Paul here takes it to another level, and he explains that it's the morality of the people that reflects in our behavior, whether you make the law against it or not. I mean, did you notice he said, even though it was illegal, it was happening. No matter how many laws you throw at it, it's going to be available. And this is the point of, you can only alter behavior by basically being an example. You can persuade people unless you want to use the force of a gun. And then, is it really charity? Is it really a culture of life? Is it really defending and protecting life? And so that's a very important point. I don't know if everybody got the nuance or subtlety of how powerful a message that was from Ron Paul last night.
It's the opposite way of thinking that most people have been programmed to think. And you're right. It's, legislating morality is that's a buzzword that a lot of people use, but really they're right that you can't force people to be moral. First of all, being moral is up to different people's interpretation of what morality is. Everybody has their own version of what's moral and what's not, but you can't force people to be, to follow your version of morality.
And what is, Don, what is less moral than theft or thieving or even murder? But think about it in this way, because all of the other candidates, I come back to the income tax, that is theft. That is force of gun thefts of basically your ability to live, your ability to produce, your ability to do things, the fruits of your labor. And they would start with that violation from a moral perspective of thou shalt not steal, much less the issue of thou shalt not kill or murder in this sense.
And so basically what Ron Paul did here is he's very clear. He's pro-life. He's pro-life, but he's not pro-forcing other people to adopt his ideals or his opinion on abortion. He has his own personal convictions as far as that goes, but he makes it very clear that it is not an issue that the federal government should be involved in. Santorum, Gingrich, and Romney earlier had tussled over some funding details in a bill that Romney had passed in Massachusetts having to do with Planned Parenthood, which, Planned Parenthood, people automatically tie that to abortion. And in this next clip, Ron Paul talks about federal funding to hospitals and how this federal funding for these programs actually complicates the abortion situation.
Very briefly, I want to talk a little bit about that funding, because the flaw there is if you send funding out and you say, well, you can have it for birth control but not for abortion, all funds are fungible. Even funds that go to any hospital, if you say, well, it's not for birth control and it's not for Planned Parenthood, it's not for abortion, if you send it to the hospital, they can still use that money. This is an indictment of government-run medicine because you never can sort that all out. You need the government out of that business, or you will always argue over who's paying what bills.
There he goes, making too much sense again, Don. He's just saying, look, you guys say that you're against it, and you're like, well, we're going to control where the funds go if we fund this, and then they complain, oh, it's Planned Parenthood. But once the hospital has the money, they use it however they want. Anybody that runs a hospital knows that.
They want control, and we've talked about this before, that when you accept money from the government for anything, then you now are giving them permission to tell you how to use it, what to use it for, when to use it, how much you can use. And so, of course, the government's going to make an issue out of trying to control what you do with that money, even if it creates an unwinnable, never-ending debate about something like abortion.
This is the madness and stupidity of a Santorum conservative, because they think, okay, when I'm in government, I'm going to control it. Nobody's going to have an abortion, right? And, of course, there's going to be another Obama that comes up and says, oh, that money's going in. And even with either side, the fact is, once the money goes into the hospital, they're going to do with it as they will. Well, we've got another clip here you've got to hear. I guess Santorum is muddying the waters even further here.
Well, it's funny when Ron Paul brought this up about the funding for some reason, and I think it's just because Santorum wears the abortion issue on his sleeve. Yeah. He thought Ron Paul was targeting him directly with that comment, and so apparently I guess Santorum decided he needed to respond.
I think that was directed at me, and so I would just say this. Congressman Paul has a national right to life voting record of 50%. Which is pretty much what Harry Reid's national right to life voting record is. So to go out and say that, you're someone who stands up for the right to life, you repeatedly vote against bills on a federal level to promote the right to life, and you say that this is an individual personal decision or state decision. Life should be protected, and you should have the willingness to stand up on a federal level and any level of government and protect what our Declaration protects, which is the right of our Creator to life, and that is a federal issue, not a state issue.
You know, the consistency of Rick Santorum is going to be apparent that it's not. But I have a new theme song for Rick Santorum. You're so vain. I bet you think Ron Paul is talking about you. Well, was he? That's the question as we hear this next clip.
Just for the record, I wasn't even thinking about you when I was giving my statement, so you were overly sensitive. But it is true that we have a disagreement on how we approach it. I followed what my understanding is of the Constitution, and it does allow for the states to deal with difficult problems. Matter of fact, it allows the states to deal with almost all the problems if you look at it. It is not given, these powers aren't given to the Congress. I see abortion as a violent act. All other violence is handled by the states. Murder, burglary, violence, that's a state issue. So don't try to say that I'm less pro-life because I want to be particular about the way we do it and allow the states the prerogative. This is the solution, because if we would allow the states to write their laws, take away the jurisdiction by a majority vote in the Congress, you repeal Roe versus Wade overnight instead of waiting year after year to change the court system.
You know, and they're never going to get
then we've got nothing to debate anymore.
Of course.
We can't get rid of Roe versus Wade overnight.
Well, isn't that the point? Because if indeed they were really anti-abortion and so-called pro-life, the Republicans controlled the House, the Senate, and the presidency. They could have done it. They didn't, because they don't want this issue to go away. Only Ron Paul's sincere about it. He says, listen, we can overturn Roe versus Wade by congressional act, take the federal jurisdiction away, and then the states would act accordingly. We know, as we've talked about on this program, not every state would be like what Rick Santorum claims to want. But the reality is, if you want to reduce these things, Ron Paul's got the only real solution that would allow that to happen.
He does. And I know we don't have really time to go into this in depth, but really that standpoint, I think, is something that pro-life and pro-choice people would unanimously agree on, because it solves the problem for both people. Because for the pro-choice people, it gets rid of Roe versus Wade, which is what they want to do, right? I mean, the pro-lifers want Roe versus Wade to go away. So it goes away. For the pro-choice people, what this does is this gives them now the ability to have a much louder voice in the debate, because it takes it away from a federal issue where people's voices are very small and people feel like they cannot affect change at a federal level. It brings it down to the state issue, where it gives them more involvement in the process in their state, gives them more of a voice.
Super Don, this is all about continuing this ball bouncing, because neither side wants it solved, because it becomes a hot button political issue that divides the electorate. Remember, the divide and conquer concept, the Hegelian dialectic plays itself on. Only Ron Paul is above that all, trying to bring everybody together with this message of freedom, and he nailed it last night, I have to say. And for those of you who really were looking for sincere, legitimate debate coverage that includes Ron Paul, tell all your friends about the Robert Scott Bell Show. This is where you'll get it, and your friends will go, thank you. Feels so much better now.
Well, we try.
Yeah, and we do. This is it. The Robert Scott Bell Show rocks on. Healing Revolution Friday continues. Dr. Frank King from King Bio joins us. We're going to talk about, female issues. Be ready. Put your seatbelts on. Take them off. Whatever you got to do. We're coming right back. Say thanks to our sponsors. Also, Tom Woods joins us later, along with Liam Sheff on The Robert Scott Bell Show.
Robert Scott Bell Show.